Hello, welcome to the Inspiring Car Dealer Leaders podcast, a special series from Car Dealer Magazine. Now, in this series, sponsored by Man Island Finance, I've been chatting to some of the greatest leaders in the motor trade to find out how they got into selling cars, how they rose to the top, and how they're inspiring the next generation of automotive retail experts. Now, this podcast is available as a video series here on YouTube, or you can also find it and listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whichever podcast platform you prefer. Now, I'm James Baggett. I'm the founder of Car Dealer. And in today's podcast, I'm absolutely delighted to be chatting to Daksh Gupta, the former CEO of Marshall Motor Group. Daksh, hello. Thank you for joining me.
Morning, James. How you doing?
Very good. Thank you, Daksh. Thank you ever so much for giving up your time. It's been a long time since we've had a chat like this, so I'm very much looking forward to it. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be wondering what you've been up to over the last few months, and we're going to delve into that as well as your leadership. I just want to say first off that this podcast might take a little longer than normal for these Inspiring Leaders podcasts because we've got a lot to talk about, haven't we? And I'm just going to do a little intro for you. And I took these words mostly from your own words on LinkedIn. But so for those people listening and watching, Daksh joined Marshall Motor Holdings PLC in 2008 as its group CEO. He led the company to be one of the fastest growing in the European automotive industry. During his tenure, revenues grew from circa £300 million to £4 billion a year, with annual profits of £80 million over the 15-year period. He transformed that business from being a small East Anglian regional group operating in 6 counties to becoming a top 5 dealer group operating in no fewer than 37 counties. He says this was achieved both organically and through the execution of a successful M&A strategy, which saw the group buy and sell 227 businesses through 84 transactions, a deal every 57 days during his tenure. Now, during that time, he put the 5,500 colleagues that he had at the heart of his business, and the group was ranked 11th best employer in the UK, according to an independent survey conducted by the Great Place to Work Institute. In April 2015, he led the successful IPO of the company onto the London Stock Exchange. Shares commenced trading at 149 pence per share. And then in November 2021, we all know the group received an offer at 400 pence, £4 per share, which with dividends represented a 292% return for shareholders who invested at that IPO. He's also vice chairman for the automotive industry charity BEN and has done many other stuff before then. Daksh, thank you very much for joining me. I've focused on your time at Marshall's there, but I do want to delve into your career and what you did before Marshall's today. But first, there is some burning questions I'd like to ask you. I mean, firstly, you left your job as CEO at Marshall's last year, didn't you? How does it feel leaving that business that clearly has meant so much to you over the years?
Well, obviously, I think people could imagine how I feel about it. Like it's in the past, we move on. But yeah, I mean, it was my baby for a long time. It's in the past, James. Let's move on.
Okay, well, I'll try not to dwell on it too much, but there are going to be a couple of questions about your Marshall's time. I mean, were you surprised when that Constellation offer came in for the Marshall's business?
Yeah, I mean, as we said in the stock exchange announcements at the time, I mean, look, we weren't aware that the offer was coming in. I mean, the stock exchange announcements I think it would have been the Monday morning when it was announced, or maybe the day after. I think we put the sort of our board's reaction to it, that we weren't aware that the offer had come in on the Monday morning at all. Were we surprised? Yeah, I mean, I think I was actually with you on the Car Dealer Awards that evening. It's funny, actually. I think you did a bit of a write-up and sort of said that I looked probably in shock. I probably did, actually, to be honest with you. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember that day very clearly. You were clearly very shocked by the announcement, and then what followed after that is you did leave the business, didn't you, in the May of last year?
Yeah.
I mean, why didn't you stay on?
I think the reality is it's when you built a business for a long time, and I was there 15 years, and just listening to some of those stats that you reeled off at the beginning, thinking, blimey, did I really lead all of that? It's it was an amazing period of my life, amazing time I had with the team there building that business. Look, it's very different because all of a sudden you're now no longer a publicly listed company. You're no longer the CEO for a standalone group, you're now going to be subsumed into a much bigger entity. So in that situation, strategy is not going to really sit with you; it's going to sit elsewhere. So it's quite. I think people can get why I made the decision. It's nothing against Constellation, against any of the individuals there. It's just a personal preference that I think I would have struggled personally in that environment, and that's not the environment necessarily as Constellation. It's just the structure. It's not going to be for everyone, is it? So I think anyone else in that situation, if they've built a business and then they're going to be a subsidiary, they'll get that.
Yeah, I understand your point there. I mean, I know automotive is absolutely in your blood, and you're incredibly passionate about this industry, aren't you? Do you keep up to date with the sector, and have you been keeping up to date over the last few months since you left last May?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, like I think it's 31 years of my life, right? So you don't sort of give that up very easily. Yeah, I mean, I follow the industry with great interest. I think when I think I had 12 months on garden leave, so you're quite restricted in what you can and can't do. So I use the time really, really wisely because when you're doing a full-time executive role, you don't get the time to sort of sit back strategically. You try and make time, but it's when you're doing a big role, it's you don't get a huge amount of time to sort of step back and think, well, okay, where's the industry going? What's going to happen? So actually, I use that time really, really wisely. I mean, I went. I think over that time period, I went overseas, 12 times, just trying to learn. Just meeting new people, looking at stuff that I never really thought I would get the opportunity to do because you're just so busy. So I used the time wisely. I read all of the industry, articles, media. Read all of the stock exchange announcements, and I mean, blimey, I mean, what a lot has happened in the last 2 years, right? It's been crazy. I mean, I'm sure we'll get talking about some of that a bit later, but it has been bonkers. So in terms of all my knowledge, I've kept it up to speed because, and I think I always will do, even in 20 years' time, whatever I'm doing, whether I'm retired or whether I'm doing something else and non-exec stuff, I don't know. I'm working in another sector. I think there'll always be a keen interest in the sector because it's been such an important part of my life for my time on this planet, really, so I'll always do that.
You must have had a lot of people knocking on your door, lots of people asking you to help them in their businesses, and I'm sure many people out there wanting you to work with them in their car dealer groups. Why haven't we seen you back in a job in the motor trade yet?
So look, I mean, the day I put my sort of post on LinkedIn, say I was stepping down. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, that particular post, which I think was 22nd of May from memory, that was viewed by 200,000 people. I mean, it was bonkers. I mean, it was like 1,200 comments were on there. So it was really amazing, to be honest with you. So and from that, a lot of people sort of wondered what I was going to do because am I going to go and do, some people thought I was going to retire. For the record, hell no. I've kind of played that for 12 months really. But it gives you the options to sort of see what's out there. I did sort of think, well, okay, in an ideal world, I'd like to go and take another CEO role up in another big dealer group. In reality, I seem to recall somebody talked about super groups happening a few years ago. James, I don't know who that was, but anyway, I seem to recall that.
Might have been you and I, Dash.
It was you and I, actually. It was about I think that was 2000, actually, wasn't it? I sort of predicted that there'd be sort of 5 to 6 super groups. I think the only thing I sort of got wrong was I thought I'd be leading one of those. But in reality, those roles of those big groups, there's very few of them now. It's a very stable population who lead those groups. So in reality, it's very easy to say, surprise you're not running one of those. Well, you can only run one if a vacancy comes up, right? And if you sit there and analyze that sort of the people who are running those groups, they've been there a long time, guys like Darren, Eddie, Robert, these guys have been there long time as CEOs. So, they do a brilliant job. And, as I said, and you can only go somewhere if there's a vacancy that comes up. And even if that vacancy comes up, you've got to basically be on the short list. You've got to go through a process. There's no guarantee you'd get that. So that's why that hasn't come in terms of one of the big roles there. I think I have had quite a number of different roles offered to me and met lots of people. So in and outside the industry, sort of smaller businesses can go and do a buy and build. But I think, it's quite tough. The automotive sector is quite tough right now to get funding for. And with all the change that's going on, to try and find somebody who's going to be a strategic investor to go and do another kind of Marshall II, so to speak, it's quite difficult. So that's why I think in terms of other roles, lots of companies have sort of approached me to do non-exec stuff. I mean, I think at one point in the first 3 months, I must have been approached by 30 different companies asking me to be a non-exec advisor or a board advisor. But I think I've been really, really careful because I do want to have another full-time executive role for sure. That I'm really, really clear on. And I did take a bit of time to think about, is that really what I want to do? But 100% I want to do another full-time exec role. I mean, I've just clicked 53 last month, a few weeks ago. And to be honest with you, I feel 33, quite frankly. I've got the energy, I've got the drive, I've got the enthusiasm. I've never really been doing it for financial reasons. I do it because I love it, and I still have that drive to want to do it. So, do I want to go and take non-exec stuff right now? No, maybe one or two, but really, I want to concentrate on another exec role.
I mean, one of the things you mentioned there was the buy and build option, and I sort of always imagined after you left Marshalls that you would want to go and do it again. You proved that the M&A strategy worked. You proved that you could build one of the top 5 dealer groups in the UK. You've got the passion clearly and the drive and energy to do it again. Is that not an avenue that you really want to push yourself down?
Yeah, I mean, if there was the opportunity, if James, you've got a couple of 100 million sat in that cupboard behind you, then let's go do it, right? But raising capital is not easy, and it's not easy in this environment either. So what you've got to remember is, if you're going to go and raise capital, someone's going to want to make a return on that. Look at what's happened to interest rates. I mean, interest rates are at 5.25% right now. I guess in some ways I was really lucky that throughout my M&A time at Marshall, interest rates were really low, and it makes it quite a compelling proposition when when you've got cash on the balance sheet, or you can borrow money at like next to nothing. It's kind of a no-brainer to invest that. But when you're sort of sat there now looking at a base rate of 5.25%, when you look at the fact that banks are generally cautious about the sector, being honest with you, and that's just not one or two of them. There's a lot of them quite cautious because there's so many things that are going on. Be that agency distribution, be that consolidation, be that what's the impact of EV. There's a lot happening. So trying to get money isn't as easy as it would have been previously. So do you really want to? As much as I'd love to go and do that, do I really want to go and borrow money at 10, 11, 12%? Does that make sense? For what purpose? And also, if you were going to go and do that, you're also potentially going to put those people at risk that you're acquiring. So, as much as I really want to go and do that, I also don't want to put people in a position of risk when you're borrowing high levels of debt at the kind of rates that are out there right now.
Do you think it's possible though, Dash? I mean, if someone came along with a big enough bank balance and wanted to invest it into the sector, do you think it's genuinely possible to do what you did with Marshalls again with the market the current state is in at the moment?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think it's possible. If you look at some of the guys that are coming in looking to bid in the UK market, and the UK is a very attractive market. Okay, it's got a few macro issues that are there right now, but actually over the long term, it's a great place to invest. We've got good security in terms of we've got good security, we've got good stability generally. We've got a reliable, abiding country, so it's a good place to invest. It's a big GDP on a global basis. So and you can see why some of the American investors have been coming in here, because it kind of makes sense for them. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump on a 5.5-hour plane from New York. We speak the same language, so I can see if you're some of the big groups with cash on the balance sheet, so that cash is doing nothing for you. Making a strategic acquisition to grow makes a lot of sense. Makes a huge amount of sense, particularly when you look at the valuation differences in terms of the UK and the US listed groups. But I think, in reality, could it be done? I mean, yes, I think there's people who could see that as an attractive option for them strategically. As I just said, like some of the American groups, kind of makes absolute sense. Could another, Marshall or a Virtue even story be done again? I mean, it's funny, I was having this conversation with my good friend Robert the other week, actually. I think it's going to be difficult because if you think about a lot of the ownership structure, a lot of these brands are really, really consolidated. So, take something like a fantastic brand like Mercedes, very desirable. Everybody wants the brand. I think there's probably only 15 investors now, is last time I looked. So all of those 15 investors are by and large big groups, are they going to want to sell their Mercedes portfolio? Probably not. So I think for that reason, I think it's going to be difficult to do. Can't be not done, but of course, you've got to find the right strategic investor and you've got to find the right assets to be able to buy. I think it could be done for sure, but it's not as easy as it was.
No, we've
Not
seen.
saying it was easy before, but I think you get my point.
I'm sure you'd like a gamble at it. I'm sure. You touched on it there. This consolidation we've seen. These investors we've seen from America come in and Canada make bids for Lookers and Pendragon. There's lots of movement in the sector at the moment. Has that surprised you at the pace that that's happened? And when those bids came in, did they shock you in any way, or were you expecting them?
Well, as I've said earlier, James, I said to you back in 2000, I forecast there would be 5 to 6 super groups, and if you think about it, that's what we've got. That you could argue we've got maybe 7 super groups there now, and there is now starting to be a clear gap between that pack and the next tier, isn't there really? So I think in reality, I think Mark Lavery once talked about the fact that he predicted there'd be no listed groups. I think when he made that prediction, was it early last year?
It was in March this year at Cardio Live.
Was it March this year? Yes. Crikey. Tells you I've had too much in the garden, doesn't it? So yeah, when he made that statement, I was thinking, Mark, that sounds a bit like a real statement and a half. But to be fair, we should maybe call him Mystic Mark really from now on, because he looks like he was probably right. Obviously Robert's still there, but I think it's fascinating, isn't it, to see what's going on.
Yeah, talking to Rob and that consolidation, your friends at Constellation have just increased their stake at Virtue, haven't they? Do you think they could make a full bid for that business?
I don't know. Not for me to comment. It's a public company. I'm sure everyone's got their own views. It's an interesting move, isn't it? So let's wait and see what happens.
I'm just interested to get your take on the idea of putting Marshalls and Virtue together. That's that is something that many people have talked about for a long time, and I'm sure Constellation are probably weighing it up. Do you think it could work?
Interesting move. I think ultimately big business, maybe the brand overlaps don't help it. If you were to look at the crossover on brands, there's a huge amount of VW Group on both sides. There's a huge amount of Jaguar Land Rover on both sides. There's a huge amount of Mercedes. I think it'd be difficult to pull those two together. In Robert and the team there, you've got an unbelievable leader, and you obviously Constellation have just brought in Martin Casher. There's lots of experience to do it. Could it be delivered? I think the view is what the OEMs would feel about that really. But I think that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, there's lots of people asking me that. That's for sure. Well, thanks for your thoughts on that. I know it's not an easy question to answer. I
thought this was inspiring leaders. This is like
Dash.
This is like Parkinson. I didn't expect to be on this actually. I'm going to get trading standards. It'll be a headline: trading standards. Dash, come and talk about inspiring leaders. Let's talk about the whole industry right now.
Sorry, Dash. Sorry. It would be very rude of me. I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't ask you some of these questions. Just before we get onto that,
this is the first one of these I've done in 2 years, man. Come on, what's wrong with you? Be kind.
You're very kind. You're very kind for giving up your time. Dash, maybe just explain to the people listening there, just before we move on to the inspiring leader side of things, what you've been up to over the last year. You've mentioned that you have been traveling a lot, and since your gardening leave finished, am I right in thinking you've been doing some stuff with Ford?
So that was really interesting. So one of the so I've known John Williams, great guy. Martin Sander. Martin gave me my first Audi franchise back in 2013. Many people remember him when he ran the Audi business in the UK. Many people remember John Williams. So both those guys I've known really, really well. Spoke to them about different opportunities, and they said, look, why don't you come and help us on agency? And I thought, okay, what do I know about working in an OEM? Not a lot. I have my perceptions and my views and external perceptions, but met with John Stuart Rowley, who's actually just joined the board of Inchcape, and with Martin in Cologne. Had dinner with them, talked it through, had a look at what they were doing in terms of the pilot market, and I thought, you know what, this is a really, really, really interesting project, and it's kind of funny because you remember Richard Parry Jones was our chairman, who sadly we lost last in 21. Richard always used to say to me, "Oh, I'd love for you to work at Ford. I think you'd make such a huge difference." So I can't help but kind of think he's probably looking down at me, thinking, "Yeah, good on you for getting involved with Ford." I think he'd be really happy that I was working with the Ford guys. So so for me, it was a kind of a project to help out on retail distribution, on agency across their agency business, which was piloted in the Netherlands. Really, really interesting project to get involved with, because obviously it's probably the biggest transformation, or one of the biggest transformations that's going on right now in terms of the automotive space. So having the opportunity to go help, learn, has been brilliant. And I've got to say, the guys there have been really welcoming, incredibly supportive. And I really love every minute of it. I mean, it's been, I never thought I would ever in a million years be working for an OEM, or doing what I'm doing. But as I said, it's a really interesting project to get involved with.
There'll be a lot of people in the motor trade very pleased to hear that someone with your experience in automotive retail is getting involved on that agency conversation on the manufacturer side. But I'm going to ask you to part the Ford work to one side and just give me your thoughts on agency overall. I mean, do you think, with your experience and from what you've seen on both sides of the coin now, whether it's a good or bad thing for the industry?
Well, it's a big topic, that isn't it, James? I think, look, the reality is, if we sort of come up a few levels, why is agency happening? In reality, it's to do with the fact that the automotive industry is changing. It's to do with the big strategic issue that's coming towards all of us, which is around climate change. How do we get to net zero? How do we reduce emissions? So that is the biggest issue that is facing the entire sector. So you've got kind of like, what people tend to term as the current incumbents. So, the likes of Volkswagen Group, Ford, and so on, how they transition from being, car producers with internal combustion engines to, a fully powertrain that's supported by EV. On the other side, you've got, people like Mr. Musk coming in, who are kind of tech companies, changing the way that they distribute, through no marketing, through online, much more reduced distribution costs. And of course, you've now got some of the Chinese brands that are coming in. And when you look at the sort of the cost that comes out of the factory, in reality, factories are very, very efficient. They run just in time operations. They're very lean. There's not a huge amount of cost you can take out of these operations. Of course, as you get scale, you'll be able to reduce the unit economics of batteries, for example. But in reality, you've got a lot going on here in terms of the competition that's coming into place. And you can see, brands such as MG have been able to come in, do a really, really good job in terms of their product and price very competitively at a time when there's a cost of living crisis. That, the cars, from what I've seen, are, pretty good looking. The product quality, from what I hear, is really good. I've driven a few of them, and I think, they drive really well. So you can see how that is an option that is going to drive some quite fierce competition within the marketplace. And I read an analyst note, part of my research that I was doing, in my time off, and actually there was a paper that basically talks about the fact that Musk was making, and this is pre the price decreases done this year, he was making $18,500 per unit, whereas there was a basket that was described as the current incumbents were making $1,000. So you can clearly straight away see, where there's a big issue. And part of that is around technology, part of that is around marketing costs, which is very significant. Part of that is around the fact that there is no retail traditional dealer taking a margin. So that's the challenge. How do these brands compete with that? So I think what's driving agency is their need to reduce costs, because, okay, we talked about the factory. We've seen over the last 10 or 15 years, national sales companies reduce their headcounts. We've talked about that a lot over the years. We've seen, instead of, whereas you might have had one MD covering Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, you might have one guy doing that now. So OEMs have reduced costs, but of course, a big part of the cost sits with the distribution that goes from the national sales company to the retailer and then ultimately the customer. Now, I think there is a perception, rightly or wrongly, that retailers just give away discount because we're nice people. So if you look at typically what happens in a lot of brands, you might start with 13%, but then you retain 4 of that metal, and then you make 3 on the sale of finance and ancillary products. So, there's the perception that we just give away 9% because we're nice people. Of course, we are nice people, but we're also a commercial enterprise, right? So, and part of why that discount's been given has been because we've been typically living in an oversupplied market. Now, of course, the pandemic changed everything because all of a sudden there was no supply. So suddenly, I think there's a perception that there's an opportunity to claw some of that margin back. I think that's very theoretical, and I think I've had the opportunity to read probably 6 or 7 papers from some of the very, very top end consultants, which I won't name, but you probably know who I'm talking about. And actually, some of what is being presented is very theoretical, and yes, on paper it kind of makes sense, but actually there is quite a lot of execution risk, I believe, involved in it. And I think you've got to say credit to Ford, who have basically said, look, we need some help with some retail, which is kind of how I've got involved. So I think the biggest issue is execution risk, and that really sits in a number of areas. It sits around culture, it sits around systems, it sits around customer interaction. So and they're probably the big 3 risks around implementation of agency. And I think you've seen a number of brands have launched agency, and probably some of those issues have been probably what's been stopping them from being really successful.
Customers are basically at the heart of everything in Man Island.
It's a well-worn phrase to say we're a people business, but that's exactly what we are. We all care and want to get things over the line for you as a dealership.
Although it's a very fast-paced, pressurised environment, we have fun.
We're very friendly, we're very welcoming, but we're also very professional as well. We like to get the job done.
Our relationship with Man Island has been centric to us doubling our finance business over the last 12 months.
So Man Island are quite unique in that we're a prime bank-owned lender, but we also work with a variety of other finance partners to give up the all-round package.
As we've grown as a lender, we're now on market with the products that we have: hire purchase, PCP, lease purchase, etc.
We're agile, we're resilient, we're always forward thinking in anything we do. We always want to provide our customers with the best possible user experience.
We don't want to be the biggest in the market, we just want to be the best in the market. And that really for me is all about the people relationships that we have with our clients, whether they're dealers, brokers, or indeed the end user.
I mean, a fascinating topic, Dash, and probably one we could do a whole podcast on. But I am very, very conscious that we're here to talk about your inspiring leadership over the years. So let's get back to that. At last, indeed. I mean, firstly, for those people listening, this podcast is about inspiring the next generation, and you really have moved up through the ranks of the motor trade to lead a listed motor trade business. I mean, perhaps we just talk about where it all began and how you got into this business.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of people get into this industry by accident. For me, it was a Saturday job. So my parents believed that I should pay my way through university, which is a good thing. I've just done the same thing with my oldest son. And I think that's good because, if I can hear my dad talking to me right now, by the way. He's saying, he would say, you've got to learn the value of a pound. And I think that's, my parents were not wealthy. They were comfortable. I would probably describe them as middle class. My mum worked for the NHS. My dad was a businessman of a small, probably it was a small enterprise, quite frankly, and he had various different business interests, but not, he was not a millionaire by any stretch of the imagination. Definitely not. I was very fortunate they sent me to private school, and they worked hard. This wasn't, kind of like, old money, so to speak, where it was gifted on the plate. They wanted to try and give me a good education, but they also wanted me to appreciate, that money doesn't grow on trees, as my mum would say. So at university, I was took a Saturday job, which was to wash cars for £15 a day in 1988, 89. And the owner of the business, a guy called James French, he may well watch this actually, because he's still in business in Cumnor. Hi, James, if you're out there. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. And he said to me, look, why are you washing cars? And I said, well, because my parents, just like I just said, you wanted me to pay my way through university. He said, look, and this was in the days when actually retail businesses didn't open on a Sunday. So you're probably not old enough to remember that, James. But, the one thing I would say is, so there was a perception that customers wouldn't come in. So they said, look, come in on a Sunday, open up, and if anyone comes in, take some inquiries and go from there. Well, of course, as we all know now, today it's the second busiest trading day, right? Because people want the convenience to work on, to be able to go and look at cars at the weekend because they're not working. So, you know what happened? First weekend I opened up, what happened? I sold 3 cars. Now, did I know what I was doing? No, I had to ring James and say, look, James, what do I do? Right, go to the key cupboard, do this, get some trade plates. And he kind of walked me through on the phone what to do. And if I'm really honest, I didn't really know what I was doing. But actually, what I realized very quickly is if you treat with people with respect, if you do what you say you're going to do, actually selling cars is the easiest thing in the world. It really is. And I really, I really believe that. And I used to say that a lot through my career and used to, I think used to annoy some people, but I genuinely believe it is easy because it is just about, treating people with respect. So that's how I got into the industry, and ended up working there kind of every weekend and, doing an afternoon here and there when, because it's not exactly a onerous schedule when you're studying, is it? And yeah, absolutely loved it. Loved talking to people, loved talking to customers, and found I was reasonably good at it.
What was that first sale like, Dash? You clearly remember it.
Yeah, so it was a really weird one, actually. There's a guy called Martin Miles. He had basically got, it's really funny. He came in on a push bike. So you kind of think, I'm sure a lot of people, and of course, wet behind the ears, didn't know what I was doing. He came in on a bike, and most people, and he looked at the most expensive car on the forecourt, which was basically a super turbo in black, G849 PUD. It was up for 29,995, okay, which probably in today's money is probably something like about, I don't know, 60 or 70,000 pounds, I guess, So, and actually, I think most people would probably say, this is this is a tire kicker, probably quite literally, but obviously not knowing any different, I went and spoke to him and treated him with respect. And it turns out that actually he'd had his super turbo stolen and written off, and he'd got a check with him from the insurance company, which is why he wanted a black super turbo like he got, and took him for it. I said, do you need a drive? He said no, because I know how they drive, and sold him the car with £500 off, and that was the first sale. And yeah, it felt good.
What did the boss say to you when you rang him up and said I've got a sale on the Supra?
I think it was really funny because James will probably kill me for saying this now, but I think he probably was very suspicious because, let's be honest about it, a guy comes on the forecourt driving, with a push bike, and I'm inexperienced, and wants to take the most expensive high performance sports car on the forecourt. He's probably thinking, is this car gonna come back right? So he said, just be careful if you're going out for a drive. He gave me some tips like, don't make sure if you do a quick drive, you take the keys out, get round the side of the car, and make sure you're sat in the car. So because I think he thought it was somebody who potentially could steal the car. So yeah, but he was pretty chuffed as I was, really.
And sorry, Dash, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but I mean that's clearly set you off on a path, hasn't it? Over the years to really got the motor trade into your blood. I mean, for people listening to this, I mean, can you give them some advice about how they can follow what you've done? I mean, what can help them take the next step in a dealership? How can they get themselves noticed?
Well, I think not everyone's going to end up, being a CEO of a big group, But I think one of the things that I always took the view was, and my parents were horrified when I left university and said I was going to go into automotive. My parents were genuinely really, really, really annoyed with me because obviously, we didn't spend all this money on private education. See, this is them talking now. We didn't spend all this money on private education fees. Go and sell cars. That was the rhetoric. And I was adopted, and my adopted parents were Indian. And if anybody knows an Indian culture, you have it drummed into you. Work hard, and you're going to be a doctor, or you're going to be an accountant, or you're going to be something professional. So it was kind of frowned upon. And I think probably even until my later years, they probably kept on saying, when you're going to get a proper job, right? So but I always took the view that actually I really enjoyed the sector, because actually I didn't think it was that difficult, because it was just about talking to people and being organized. And but I always took the view that if I could be a general manager by the time I was sort of 40, I would have done well. Now, as it happens, I did it by the time I was 25. And I think a lot of people don't realize the opportunities that are in the sector, because I mean, it is amazing. I mean, you get to I think if you look at this sector and see what it pays versus other sectors, I think people need to have a bit of a reality check, quite frankly, you know. Now, part of that is because it's quite a unique skill. It's a very entrepreneurial skill, and you're managing quite big businesses, which are very, very complex. You're dealing with depreciating assets. You've got multi skills in terms of HR, health and safety, balance sheets, finance. So, you know, you do kind of pay for that skill. But, you know, I think we also have to be a bit of a reality check that we are very well paid. I mean, I don't know what the average salesperson earns today, but I mean, you know, I would guess it's probably somewhere around 40 to 45,000 pounds, probably, and that's probably average. You know, go and have a look at what the average person earns in this country is 33 grand. You know, and they don't get a company car. So I would say, in terms of answering your question, what do I recommend? Hard work. You know, I mean, I never thought I was that good, and I still don't think I'm that good. So I think what I always try to do is learn more. If anyone knows me, they'll know I'm really into the detail and the numbers, and it's probably because there's a huge amount of imposter syndrome there, James. I never thought I was. I still don't think I'm that good. So I always work harder than the next guy. You're shaking your head that that's truly how I feel. You know, so I would say to people, don't ever give up on your dreams. If I can do it, you know, anyone can do it. It's just hard work. Don't be scared to ask questions. You know, I'm quite a curious person. I like learning, you know, and the one thing is there's never a really stupid question that you can ask, you know, and your bosses will like that and show a really good positive attitude. I mean, that they're sort of traits that I think people should have, but you can genuinely achieve it. You know, you can really, really be successful in this industry.
I don't think anybody listening to this would class you as an imposter, that's for sure, Dash.
No, seriously, I know, James, I really do, because I meet people in the sector who are way, way, way more intelligent than me, way more intelligent than me. Do they work as hard as me? Don't know. Are they as curious? Do they basically go and find out everything that they can? And you know, during my time at Inchcape, we used to have something called the red book, and then they changed the color to, it used to be called the buff book. And I would sit there and read every single line and try and understand what was going on in the business, you know, every month without fail. And that's how I learned.
Who over the years, Dash, has inspired you the most during your career?
Oh, wow. So many, to be honest with you, James. I mean, look, there are so many people you could name on this. You know, I think, and it doesn't need to necessarily be somebody who's, you know, with, like someone like a Sir Peter Vardy or a Peter Johnson and what they did, you know, or Peter Jones, you know, some of these guys were absolute legends. Tony Bramall, these were guys, you know, Trevor Finn, you know, I mean, Trevor, you know, built the first scalable dealer group in the UK, the first £1 billion group, and actually what he was doing in terms of strategy wasn't wrong, and others followed, to be fair. So I think, you know, these are people that I kind of grew up looking at and thinking, wow, aren't these guys amazing? And then, you know, one day you sort of end up in a senior role, you know, a similar sort of size to me, and you think, I never expected that to happen, you know. But I think people that have inspired me, you know, I think Sir Peter Vardy is amazing. I was very fortunate. I had really great mentors and non-execs. So, you know, Alan Cook at the board at Marshall is an ex-chairman of HS2. Speak to him every week. I learn a lot. You know, people like Sarah Sillers were on my board and gave me a good kick up the arse now and again when I needed it. So, you know, but you look at the industry today, there's loads of great guys there. I mean, I think Robert's done a fantastic job at Virtue. Darren Edwards is a class act. You know, Eddie, wow, you know, he's just a machine. So there's lots of people and that inspire you in the industry, you know, for sure. But also not just in the automotive, with elsewhere, people inspire you. I mean, one of the things I like to read is, you know, I like to put positive things in my head. So things like I read to Anthony Robbins quite a bit, or anything like that, which is going to be positive and just make you think a bit differently, really.
It's good to have people to look up to in any industry, isn't it? And certainly in automotive, there's lots of those. I mean, as you've been growing throughout your career, and you've worked for different people. I mean, you worked for John O'Hanlon, didn't you? At one point, one of the subjects of this very podcast, and he spoke about your time there. What was it that you picked up from these great leaders that you've decided to use throughout your career? Because you've always put your staff first, haven't you? I mean, that was very much apparent during the pandemic. Was that something that you've picked up from other people over the years?
Well, I think I always took the view that as I was sort of growing up the ranks, you know, you sometimes see stupid things happen from head office, and I always used to kind of, and you might think they were stupid, but because you didn't really have it explained to you why that was being done. So I always took the view, if ever I was in a fortunate enough position to be in a senior role, I'd always basically try and communicate why we were making certain decisions so people could engage and buy into it. So it wasn't seen as, oh, here's head office, stopping us from running the business. So you've got to have a balance, So I think the thing I would say is the focus on people was always, this is a people business. Any business where you've got multi-site, where you've got retail businesses across that significant scale, it's a people business. And one of the things that people listening to this, they will recognize great leaders and they'll recognize bad leaders. And I can tell you, we used to benchmark this to crazy, and you could see where you'd got really profitable business that performed year in, year out. They would have great customer satisfaction. They'd have really low turnover. They'd have really high engagement scores. And guess what? You look at the leader in that business, and you said, that's all about that. You do the same on a poor performing business. You have high turnover, poor customer satisfaction, poor engagement, and guess what? You'd have Kermit the Frog running the business, right? So if that's the case, then the most important thing you've got to focus on is people, because that's the key differentiator in a multi-site environment such as this, not just in automotive, other sectors that I see as well. And it's always down to people. So that's where my passion for people always came from, because ultimately, when all's said and done, if you're running a big business, what is the culture in that business? What is that individual service advisor or salesperson or receptionist going to say when that customer walks through the door? And that's about the culture that you have in the business. And that's about what you set as a standard from day one. So that's why I'm focused on people.
So what do you think? I mean, I can sort of guess the answer to this, but what do you think great car dealer leaders should concentrate on the most when they're running their business? Is it the people?
I would say for me, people is really, really, would always be the number one criteria, because ultimately, it's what makes or breaks a business. So for me, it's always people and culture. So not when you say people, I think culture is kind of wrapped up into that as well. What are you doing in terms of recruitment? What are you doing in terms of talent management, succession planning? What are you doing in terms of future leader development? What are you doing in terms of retention? How are you rewarding people? How are you inspiring people? How are you motivating people? So that is a massive, 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 massive topic. And I don't see enough of that within, lots of organizations that I see, for me, that's the number one priority, is always people. Now, not everybody agrees with me. People don't think it's about that. They think it's about the buildings and it's about the franchises and people will come and buy. I don't share that philosophy, but I don't know who's right or wrong, but that's just all I can do is do what I do.
Now, Dash, you've done some mega deals over your career, not discounting that super one of your first car sale. What's the one that's the most memorable? I mean, is it one of the big dealer groups that you purchased, or is it something else? What really sticks out in your mind when you look back at your career?
I think there's been so many highlights, to be honest with you, James. I mean, look, working with different people is fun, but I think it's like, you mentioned John there. I mean, I've got such a huge amount of respect for him as a guy. He's great, and I'm so pleased to see, what top job he's doing at Wayland's, and so really, really happy to see that. I think the Ridgeway deal clearly for me was always going to be one that would be a highlight. I mean, it's a bit of a weird one because obviously I was there previously as MD, and then sort of almost coming back, and it was just a set of circumstances that David wanted to sell, and it just it was right for David in particular. He obviously owned 90% of the company, and it was a really good fit for us. And people remember the day we announced that, where we had got the perfect sort of geographic footprint overlap and brand overlap. And obviously it was a business that I knew because obviously I was there previously, and even when I joined Marshall, I stayed as a non-exec, so I knew the business quite well. So that was always one that would be memorable. I think Motorline will be memorable because it was a big deal. I think also, to be fair, the IPO would be, whilst that wasn't an acquisition as such, taking a business public is not a easy exercise. I mean, it is a big deal. I mean, it's interesting, just as a chatting to you, will you ever see another listed dealer group in the space? And that's an interesting question, because I'm not sure, to be honest with you now, because of all the sort of strategic issues that I think investors look at and think, well, where's this all going to land? Which brands should I invest in? Which dealer group? Have they got the right brands? Are those brands going to be the ones that will get through, the transition through EV? So there's a lot of questions there. What's the impact of EV going to be on after sales? What's the impact of agency? And that's why you probably have such low valuations on the listed dealer groups. Not as many left now, but that's why the valuation's low. But you compare that to the US, where it's very, very different. I mean, the multiples are kind of double what they are in the UK, or what they have been in a normalized period, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Dash, just talking about the staff that you've hired over the years. I mean, you've clearly taken on a lot of people in your time. What was it that you looked for in a good car dealer employee? I mean, people want to get into this business who perhaps listen to this. How can they present themselves so they actually get the job?
So I always used to. I think those heads of business roles are absolutely critical. The guys who run the actual, the operations, they're really, really key. So this might sound a bit control freakish, okay, but I used to interview every single one. Now it sounds onerous, but actually we didn't have a huge turnover at that level, so you don't have to do too many. And I'm not really looking for, whether they can do the job, because quite frankly, a director will have already, done all that exercise. I'm more looking for cultural fit. What are they like as a person? What drives them? What motivates them? Why they sat in front of me? Why do they want to leave where they are? What's their motivation? So I that's the key things I look for, is what is that person, what are their core values? Why do they, what can I expect from that person,
And Dash, just as we come towards the end of this podcast, there's a few questions that I've asked everybody that I'd like to ask you too. I mean, one of the ones is what really gets up your nose about the car industry? Is there one thing that you would change?
Oh, I think sometimes one of the things I don't like is I don't like there's some fantastic characters in the industry. There's also some less fantastic characters in the industry. And you sometimes see behavior that you just think, why would you do that? Why would you put your reputation at stake for, personal gain or above other things? And that's where you kind of think, I don't know why you would do that, So yeah, I think I see some of that, really, and I don't like it.
And for people considering this as an industry, what would you say is the most rewarding part of working in the car dealer game?
It's a privilege, isn't it? I mean, look, how much fun do you have? I mean, we get paid to have fun at work, we get to drive amazing products. We deal with some of the biggest brands in the world. It's not that difficult. I don't care what anybody said it isn't. I appreciate it. I was having a chat with a very good friend of mine on Thursday last week, who I won't name, and he said to me, I bet you're quite chuffed sat there right now, not having to be in a situation where you're having to navigate through all of these big price depreciations. I said, well, no, I am missing it, actually, quite fair. But it's challenging. It's challenging. It's rewarding mentally. It stimulates you. And listen, as I said at the beginning, it pays really, really, really ridiculously well, as far as I'm concerned, based compared to other sectors.
And Dash, will we see you back in this industry?
I am back in the industry. I'm working for Ford, James.
Well, you know what I mean. On the car dealer side, the side that you love and the bit that you're so good at.
I think, as I said, the post that I left Marshall, I said I was really open-minded about what I would do. And I guess I'm in a really fortunate position where I can be picky, and I'm only going to do stuff where it's got a very clear strategy, where the people are right, where the ownership is right, where there's ambition, because I just want to go and babysit. I've been offered 4 roles in the last few months, but I think it's got to be right. It's got to be right, and it's going to be something that's going to stimulate me. And I think that's because whatever I do, and I know I said this when I joined Marshall, and I remember being interviewed and said, because I was 37 when I got the Marshall role, and I said this will be my last job, and I meant it, and it would have been my last job, But I think whatever I do next will be my last job, hopefully. So it's a case of just making sure it's right. Now, whether that is inside or outside the industry is yet to be seen. But I think there are interesting businesses outside the industry where I think the skill set does apply. There are big businesses, and I think the skill set that we have in automotive definitely is transferable, because we're used to operating in a cyclical industry. We're used to operating in a situation where we're dealing with assets, finance, people. It's a complex business, OEM relationships, and that skill can transfer to another industry for sure. So I think I don't think people should be surprised if I go into another industry, to be honest with you, because there are lots of challenges. And the question I sort of say, well, okay, what, unless I was going to get the role that was right in automotive, then why do it? Because I think I've done a reasonable job in automotive, but actually, could you then take all of that skill set and do in another sector? That could be quite exciting. So, nothing's been kind of finalised yet, but let's wait and see.
I'm sure I speak for the industry when I say that that will be a huge shame, and we would certainly miss you greatly, Dash. So don't give up on the industry just yet, please.
Thanks, James.
Right, Dash. My last question for you: what would you wish you'd been told when you started in this industry? Is there one piece of advice you could give people, or you could give yourself if you go back to that day when you sold that Toyota Supra?
I think I won't just say one. There's lots of things I would say. I would say I could probably listen a bit better, and I was very fortunate. I think sometimes when you're in your 20s and you're a GM at 25 and you're a franchise director at Inchcape at 30, you kind of think you can achieve anything. And I think it's right to have confidence, but I think maybe listen to some people that you've got around you. I think I was very, very, very blessed with some amazing non-executive directors that I learned a lot from. So I think listen to people who are giving you good advice. I'd also say hang around people who are going to give you that right advice, where there's no agenda, where no one's trying to, get one over on you, or trying to basically give you advice just because they want something personal. So hang around. If you always say, if you hang around deadheads, you become a deadhead yourself. If you hang around positive people, you become a positive and successful person. So listen, learn. I'd say that the other things was, don't let anyone say you can't do it. I really, really would say to people, because a lot of people do message me and ask me for the advice and what did you do? It is hard work. No one gives anything for free, but you can do it. You really can, and don't let anyone steal your dreams, because if this guy can do it, and I really am not that good, then anyone can do it. I really do believe that.
Dash, amazing advice. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. Thank you very much for putting up my questions at the beginning, and for those truly inspirational words. It's been so nice to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
That's Daksh Gupta, automotive industry legend and former CEO of Marshall Motor Group. Now, to be notified about more podcasts and the Inspiring Car Dealer Leaders series sponsored by Man Island Finance, please subscribe on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, or if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. And if you'd like our podcast, please remember we do a weekly news roundup with a special guest every Friday, and you can find that by searching for the Car Dealer Podcast. You can find the other episodes in this series on our website, cardealermagazine.co.uk, in the podcast section by scrolling down the homepage. I'll have another episode for you very soon. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.